Poor girl took a beggar home, not knowing he is a millionaire CEO, and what he did surprised everyone. Before watching the video, please leave a like to support our channel. Comment number 8 if you want to know the end of the story. The sky was heavy with gray that morning, and the streets of the city shimmered with yesterday's rain. Olivia Grant moved fast, her boots splashing through puddles as she clutched two things: a worn leather folder that held her crumpled resume, and a brown paper bag filled with leftover rice and chicken she'd scraped together from last night's shift at the diner. She was late, not just late for a job interview, but late in life, it felt. 27 and still chasing temp gigs that promised a future and never delivered one. Her hair, pulled into a crooked ponytail, bounced with each step, and her heart thudded against her ribs like a clock running out of time. To save a few minutes, she darted into a narrow alley, a shortcut she'd taken before. But today the city had other plans. A slick patch of wet newspaper betrayed her, and in one breathless second, her foot flew out from under her. The bag of food soared into the air, and she hit the ground with a hard, humiliating thud. For a moment, she didn't move. She just stared at the scattered rice and greasy chicken chunks now smeared across the damp pavement like her dignity. "Great," she muttered, blinking back the frustration welling in her throat. Her blouse was stained, her elbow scraped, and her last meal was now being eyed by a pigeon with no shame. "Are you hurt?" The voice was calm, too calm for this place. Olivia twisted around and saw a figure step from behind a stack of old cardboard boxes. He looked like he belonged to the alley. Worn coat, scruffy beard, hair that hadn't seen a comb in days. But his eyes, they didn't match the rest of him. They were sharp, kind, and quietly knowing, like a man who'd once had a life that meant something. She tried to brush herself off with a laugh, but it came out more like a sigh. "Just my pride," she said, "and my lunch." The man stepped forward, picked up her now empty container with surprising care, and handed it back to her with a faint smile. "Still a few grains left. Good rice deserves better than the sidewalk." Olivia hesitated. "Do you live here?" He looked up at the cracked bricks and blinking neon sign above the alley entrance. "For now, yes," he said, "but I suppose I'm just between stories. The old one's over and the new one hasn't begun." She frowned. Who talks like that? That's when she saw the cut. His foot, exposed from a torn shoe, was bleeding slightly, the skin split and raw. "You're hurt." He shrugged like it didn't matter. "It's nothing. I've had worse." Without thinking, Olivia knelt beside him, reaching into her bag. "I've got some bandages. Hold still." He flinched when the alcohol touched the wound, but didn't complain. In fact, he grinned through the pain. "You know," she said, taping him up, "I don't normally offer first aid in alleyways." He chuckled. "And I don't usually receive it. First time for everything." Her stomach growled just then, embarrassingly loud. She sighed. And now I've officially hit rock bottom. No job, no lunch, and I'm patching up a stranger while starving." "I have a half loaf of bread," he said, reaching into a ragged bag. "Not much, but enough to share." Olivia stared at him. It was absurd. But then again, everything about today already was. "Only if you have butter." He laughed, and it was warm, real, like a melody from some forgotten life. And so, two strangers sat on the edge of a grimy alley, breaking bread like old friends under a cloudy sky. She didn't know that this was the first of many unexpected moments to come, that this man with tattered shoes and mysterious eyes would one day change everything. But for now, they just shared silence, bread, and a little warmth, like two souls standing at the edge of something neither of them could name yet. The days that followed were cold, colder than Olivia remembered them being this early in the season. She wrapped herself in her one decent coat, hustling between job interviews and temporary gigs. An endless cycle of hopeful starts and silent rejections. But every afternoon, like clockwork, she passed through that same alley. And every afternoon he was there, the man with the thoughtful gaze and torn coat, sitting with his back against the bricks, reading a battered old paperback, or simply watching the clouds shift above. He never asked for anything. Not food, not sympathy, not even her time. And maybe that's why she kept stopping. Sometimes they'd share a few words, a joke, a short conversation about nothing important. Other times just a nod and a smile. But slowly, without either of them noticing, his presence became a strange kind of constant in her otherwise fragile days. One evening, the wind was biting as Olivia walked home from yet another disappointing interview. Her hands were numb, her nose red, and as she turned into the alley, she saw him again, hunched, shaking slightly. The makeshift bandage she'd applied days ago was still there, now grimy and barely clinging to the skin. She didn't stop walking, not at first. But 10 steps past him, something inside her snapped. She turned back. "You're still bleeding," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. He looked up with a forced smile. "It's healing. Slowly." "No, it's not." She stood there a long moment, her mind spinning between common sense and compassion. "I have a room," she said finally. "It's not much, tiny really, but it's warm. There's a bed. You can stay the night, just tonight." His eyes didn't widen in surprise like she expected. He just blinked slowly like he was considering something deeper than a simple invitation. "You don't even know my name," he said gently. "No, I don't," she replied. "But I know you're not going to last another night out here." He hesitated, whether from pride, fear, or something else she couldn't name. But in the end, he nodded. "I won't overstay," he said. "Good," she replied, though she wasn't sure if she meant it. They walked in silence. His limp was subtle, but it was there. Still, he walked with a kind of posture that felt dignified, almost noble, like someone used to standing tall, even when the ground beneath them was cracked. When they reached her small apartment, Olivia fumbled with the keys, suddenly nervous. "Welcome to the palace," she said with a tired grin. "Ignore the smell of takeout and my bad taste in wall art." He stepped in slowly, eyes scanning every detail, not judgmentally, just absorbing. He stopped in front of a framed photograph on the shelf, an older woman with soft eyes and a mischievous smile. "My grandmother," Olivia explained. "She's in a nursing home now. I visit every Sunday." He touched the frame gently. "She reminds me of someone," he murmured. Olivia tilted her head. "Who?" He shook his head. "Another lifetime." She showed him the back room. Small, drafty, but clean. The heater in the corner groaned but worked. "This is it," she said. "Bathrooms down the hall, towels in the cabinet. Don't get too comfortable." "I won't," he said. "Just for tonight." That night, sleep didn't come easy for either of them. Olivia lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding. Not from fear, but something else. A quiet knowing that she just made a choice that couldn't be undone. And in the other room, the man with no past and no future stared at the shadows on the wall, wondering how one act of kindness could feel so terrifying. They didn't know it yet, but that night would be the first thread in a tapestry neither of them saw coming. A story stitched not in grand gestures, but in warmth, in silence, in the quiet opening of a door. The smell of coffee crept through the apartment like a memory. Olivia stirred in her sleep, at first unsure whether it was real or something she'd dreamed. But then she heard the soft clink of a spoon against ceramic and the gentle hum of running water. She sat up, rubbed her eyes, and for a moment forgot that she wasn't alone. Padding barefoot into the kitchen, her oversized sweater hanging off one shoulder, she froze at the sight in front of her. He was there, standing by her stove, barefoot, sleeves rolled up, the morning light softening the edges of his otherwise rugged frame. He looked settled, calm, as though he belonged there. "You're up early," she said, her voice still thick with sleep. He turned, holding a steaming mug. "Thought I'd make coffee. Your machine's a bit temperamental, but I think I convinced it." Olivia raised a brow. "It hasn't worked properly in months." He shrugged. "Just needed to be reminded how." She narrowed her eyes slightly. "You're awfully handy for someone living in an alley." He gave a modest smile. "I've picked up things here and there." She accepted the mug, took a cautious sip, then grimaced. "You've picked up many things, but not coffee making." He laughed, really laughed this time, and it filled the room like sunlight. She found herself smiling despite herself. He poured a second cup and sat across from her at the little kitchen table. His movements were careful, precise, like someone who had lived in houses far finer than hers and still remembered how to fold a napkin without creasing it. "Did you sleep?" she asked. "Well enough, he said, then hesitated. "It's the first roof I've slept under in a long time." They were quiet for a moment, sipping from mismatched mugs. "Do you have a name?" she finally asked. "Ethan," he said. "Ethan Rowe." It rolled off his tongue too naturally to be a lie, but something about it still felt veiled, protected. "And you?" he added. "Livia," she replied. "Livia Grant." He nodded as if committing it to memory. "It suits you." She didn't know what that meant, but it made her cheeks warm anyway. "I have work today," she said after a pause. "2 deliveries and a maybe kind of interview." Ethan nodded. "Would it be all right if I stayed one more night? I'll be gone before sunrise if you prefer." Olivia chewed her lip. Every part of her screamed that this was a bad idea. But he hadn't touched anything, hadn't asked for money, hadn't looked at her the wrong way. In fact, he'd cleaned the dishes she left in the sink. "All right," she said finally, "but no more fixing things without permission. And definitely no more attempts at porridge." He placed a hand to his heart. "Noted." As she gathered her things and rushed to get ready, he stayed behind, clearing the table, folding the dish rag neatly and wiping down the counter like it was second nature. And when Olivia left for the day, muttering under her breath about bus delays and broken shoelaces, she didn't realize she was leaving behind more than just a house guest. She was leaving behind a man who read the titles on her bookshelf with reverence, who fixed the faulty heater using a bent spoon, and who stood silently at her window for hours, as if remembering what it felt like to belong somewhere. Ethan Rowe had once owned skyscrapers and signed deals in rooms that smelled of leather and power. But here, in a small apartment with peeling paint and a stubborn coffee pot, he felt something he hadn't in a long time: peace. When Olivia stepped through the door that evening, she didn't notice it at first. She was too tired, too drained from another day of rushed deliveries, forced smiles, and the deafening silence of a receptionist's "we'll let you know." But after she kicked off her shoes and dropped her keys into the chipped bowl by the door, she froze. Something was different. The air smelled cleaner. The clutter that normally took over the small counter was gone. The dish rack was stacked neatly, and the floor beneath her feet, once sticky with spilled soda, gleamed. She walked slowly into the living room, blinking. Ethan was sitting calmly on the couch, book in hand, legs crossed like he'd always belonged there. He looked up and smiled. "You cleaned," she said, not accusing, just surprised. "You work hard," he replied, closing the book. It felt fair. She looked around. The bookshelf had been reorganized, not just dusted, curated. Her dog-eared novels and secondhand finds now stood proudly in rows. A candle she hadn't lit in months flickered softly on the side table. "I didn't ask you to do any of this." "No," he said gently, "but I wanted to. You took me in when I had nothing. This is the least I could do." It should have made her feel grateful. Instead, it made her uneasy. Most people in your situation wouldn't know how to fix a heater or repair a toaster or fold towels like a hotel maid. He smiled faintly. "I've lived many lives, Olivia. And what exactly did you do before this one?" He looked at her for a long moment, and then he said, "I lost it." "What?" "My life. I lost it. I had something big, and I let it slip. So I came here to disappear." Olivia didn't know how to respond to that. Her first instinct was to press him, ask questions, demand more. But something about the way he said it, like it still hurt to speak out loud, made her pause. Instead, she walked over, sat beside him, and asked, "What are you reading?" He held up the cover, Economics for Dummies. She arched a brow. "Light reading, huh?" Ethan chuckled. "Thought I'd start over from the basics." And they sat there side by side, the flicker of the candle dancing between them. Later that night, as Olivia lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind wandered to him. How he moved, how he spoke, how he always seemed like a man hiding in plain sight. He wasn't just some guy from the street. No homeless man uses phrases like "between stories" or folds a bath towel like it came out of a five-star hotel. And yet, there he was, quiet, respectful, never asking for more than she offered. That should have been enough. But curiosity has a funny way of growing in the quiet. She rose, padded softly to the bookshelf, and pulled the book he had been reading earlier. Page 47 was dog-eared. She opened it. There, scribbled neatly in the margin with her own pen, were 8 words that stopped her breath. "You're better than you think. Just be seen." She touched the words with her fingers. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, Olivia felt like she wasn't invisible, like someone saw her, really saw her. And that scared her more than anything else. The following morning unfolded like a quiet melody. Olivia woke to the sound of soft jazz humming from the little Bluetooth speaker she barely used. The scent of brewed coffee wafted down the hallway, coaxing her out of bed like a warm hand on her back. She walked into the kitchen and blinked. Ethan stood at the counter, wearing her grandmother's old apron, blue with yellow daisies, pouring pancake batter onto a sizzling skillet with focus and care. "You're making breakfast?" she asked, half amused, half alarmed. He looked up with a guilty smile. "Trying. I read the instructions this time." Olivia grabbed a mug, took a sip of the coffee already waiting for her, and raised her eyebrows. "Okay, this is actually good." "I'm learning," he said with a playful shrug. She sat down, watching him move around the small kitchen like it was familiar. Too familiar. "You're very at home here," she said, not meaning it as a compliment or an insult, just stating it. Ethan didn't flinch. "Because you've made it feel like a home." She wanted to believe that, wanted to believe he was just a kind man with a broken past, trying to piece his life back together. But she also wasn't naive. "You know," she said after a long pause, "you never really told me where you are from." He flipped a pancake with more elegance than necessary. "Does it matter?" "It might, to me." He set the spatula down and turned to face her. "I'm from a world where people forget names unless they're written on the front of a building, where handshakes are contracts and smiles are weapons. I used to wear suits that cost more than your rent, and I dined with people who could buy cities. And yet, I felt lonelier than I do now. Sitting here barefoot in a stranger's kitchen, making pancakes that probably taste like cardboard." Olivia said nothing, because she didn't know if she believed him or if she just wanted to. He served her a plate with 2 imperfect pancakes and a drizzle of syrup. She took a bite. "They're not bad," she admitted. "You might survive breakfast." He smiled. But later, when she left for work, a weight sat heavy in her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing at the edge of something big, something she didn't fully understand. That afternoon, she returned to find the hallway light fixed. The flickering bulb, something she'd ignored for months, now glowed steady and warm. "You fixed the light?" she asked. "It was bothering me." "With what? You don't have tools." "I improvised," he said, showing her a bent spoon and 2 old batteries. "Childhood curiosity. I used to take things apart just to see how they worked." Olivia folded her arms. "You're not who you say you are." Ethan tilted his head. "I never said who I was." She stared at him. He didn't flinch, didn't look guilty. Just stood there like someone who knew that truth and mystery often wore the same face. "Why are you really here?" she asked. He looked away toward the window. "Maybe I just needed someone to ask me that." That night, neither of them said much. They ate quietly, shared the couch in silence, watched the news without paying attention. And before bed, Olivia found herself pausing at the door to the guest room. "Ethan?" "Yes?" "Thank you for the light and the pancakes and everything." He didn't smile. He just nodded, eyes steady on hers. "Sleep well, Olivia." And she did, for the first time in a long time. The afternoon was unusually quiet. Outside, the city seemed to have paused. No honking horns, no barking dogs, not even the usual rustle of neighbors moving around upstairs. Olivia sat at the table, scribbling ideas for a freelance writing gig she'd been chasing. Ethan was on the couch, book in hand, his eyes distant as if reading more than words. That's when the knock came. 3 short raps, firm, sharp. Olivia glanced at Ethan. He didn't move. Another knock followed, louder, more deliberate. She stood, walked to the door, and opened it to find her landlord, Mr. Barrett, a stocky man with a clipped mustache and the personality of a soggy teabag. "Miss Grant," he said, clearing his throat, "we've had a few reports." "Reports?" she asked, stepping outside and closing the door slightly behind her. "Some of the tenants have noticed a man coming and going from your unit. Tall, scruffy, doesn't seem familiar." Olivia's heart skipped. "He's a friend." "Yeah, I'm a friend," she said calmly, "and staying for a few days. Nothing more." Barrett gave her a long, skeptical look. "You know the rules. Long-term guests need to be registered. Security's been tighter since the break-in last month." She forced a polite smile. "He won't be here long." Barrett nodded, eyes narrowing. See that he isn't. And when she stepped back inside, she found Ethan standing in the hallway, arms folded. You heard all that? I did. I'm sorry, she said. They don't mean anything. They just like to gossip. Ethan didn't reply right away. He walked back to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood silently at the window. They're watching, he said softly. Olivia frowned. Who is? I don't know yet, but they're looking for me. She walked closer, her voice low. Ethan, what are you hiding? He turned slowly, eyes meeting hers. Nothing I wanted you involved in. That's not an answer. He looked at her for a long, still moment. Then, as if the weight was finally too much to carry, he exhaled. I used to run a company, he said. Big, loud, powerful. I built it from a rented desk and 2 investors who laughed at me. But it grew, too fast, too wide, and I trusted the wrong people. He walked over to her small bookshelf, ran his fingers across the spines like they were old friends. One of them betrayed me, signed deals behind my back, tried to sell the company under a fake shell business. When I found out, there was an accident, a helicopter crash. My name was in the papers for weeks, missing, presumed dead. Olivia stared, her heart hammering. What are you saying? I'm saying Ethan Rowe isn't my real name. It's Daniel Blake. And once, not so long ago, I was CEO of one of the fastest growing tech firms in the country. She stepped back, hands trembling. And you've been hiding here with me? I didn't plan it. I didn't even mean to speak to you that day in the alley. But then you fell, and you looked so frustrated, like the world had used you up, and I felt the same. He reached into his bag, the one she'd never dared to open, and pulled out a folded newspaper. He handed it to her. There on the front page was a picture of a man in a crisp suit, clean-shaven, confident, standing in front of a glass building with the words Blake Tech carved in silver. Olivia's knees almost buckled. It was him. Different, yes, but unmistakable. Her voice shook. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I wanted to remember what it felt like. To just be a person. Not a headline, not a balance sheet. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. Inside, the silence between them grew deeper. You should go, she said finally. Olivia, no, not forever. Just for now, I need time. He nodded, and for the first time since he'd walked into her life, Daniel, looked unsure of what to say. So he said nothing. He packed a small bag that night and left quietly, pausing at the door only long enough to whisper, thank you for seeing me. And then he was gone. The apartment felt too quiet, too still. For the first time since Daniel had left, Olivia noticed how loud silence could be. His presence had filled the space, not in volume but in warmth, in subtle things like the extra pair of shoes by the door, the folded blanket on the couch, the humming of someone reading by the window. Now all of it was gone, except one thing. She found it the next morning, tucked inside a book on her shelf, the same one he'd been reading the day he fixed the hallway light. Economics for Dummies. Inside, between pages 132 and 133, was a small flash drive. No label, no note. Just cool plastic and quiet mystery. She stared at it for a long time before plugging it into her laptop. What she found wasn't just files. It was a confession, spreadsheets, transaction records, memos signed by a Victor Maddox, Blake Tech's acting CEO, audio recordings of board meetings, a slideshow labeled Acquisition Proposal Confidential. It was the map of a crime wrapped in corporate language and sealed with handshakes in dark rooms. Daniel hadn't disappeared to run. He had disappeared to survive. And now it was all in her hands. She sat back in her chair, heart thudding. The temptation to shut it all down and walk away pulled at her. This wasn't her world. She was a girl with a borrowed coat and a resume full of broken promises. She wasn't built for backroom politics and billion-dollar betrayal. But something else pushed stronger. She thought of the way Daniel looked at her when she was patching his foot, the way he folded towels, the way he touched her grandmother's photo as if he carried a grief he never spoke about. A man like that didn't leave this behind for just anyone. He trusted her, and whether she liked it or not, she trusted him back. So that night, she pulled out the flash drive again and opened a new folder titled Answers. Over the next 2 days, Olivia studied everything. She stayed up late, took notes, ask questions in online forums under an anonymous name. She reached out to an old friend, Sam, who used to work IT at a legal firm. Together, they pieced the puzzle slowly. Whoever this guy is, Sam said, looking at the encrypted file Ethan left behind, he's either crazy, brave, or both. He's not crazy, Olivia whispered. He's just tired of hiding. By the third day, she had something, evidence. Not just suspicion or theory, but timelines, money trails, board decisions that directly pointed to Victor selling Blake Tech's assets through a shell company registered in Panama. It was enough to start a war, but also enough to change everything. That night, she opened her email and typed out a message. To ethan.rowe@protonmail.com. Subject, I know who you are. Message, you trusted me. I didn't ask for it, but I have it. And now, I need to see you, not as the man from the alley, not as the CEO, just as you. Come back. Oh, she hovered over send for a long moment, and then she clicked. Whatever happened next wasn't about pity or fear or curiosity anymore. It was about truth. And maybe, just maybe, a second chance. The email went unanswered for a full day, then 2, then 3. Olivia tried to focus on her freelance work, but the words blurred, the deadlines passed, and her mind drifted. Had he seen the message? Had she said too much? Or not enough? On the fourth evening, just after she returned from a short grocery run, she noticed something resting by her door. A small envelope. No postage, no name. Inside was a note, plain, handwritten. Midnight, corner of Easton and 5th. No questions, just come. Her heart kicked against her ribs. She stared at the clock, 10:41 p.m. She didn't even change clothes, just grabbed her coat, shoved the note in her pocket, and left. The streets were nearly empty. The cold nipped at her ears, but her legs moved fast. Almost too fast. She didn't know what to expect. A conversation, an apology, a goodbye. What she found was none of those. At the corner of Easton and 5th stood Daniel, hood pulled low, hands in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched like he wasn't quite sure he deserved to be seen. Their eyes met. Neither spoke for a moment. You came, he finally said, voice low. You told me to, Olivia replied. He offered a faint smile. I didn't know if you would. She took a breath. You left me with a flash drive full of corporate fraud, an inbox full of questions, and a heart that hasn't stopped racing since the day I met you in that alley. You didn't really think I'd walk away now, did you? Daniel lowered his head. I wanted to protect you, he said. I didn't ask you to, she whispered. I know. That's what makes it worse. They stood there in the glow of a dim street lamp, the night thick with tension and something unspoken. Olivia reached into her coat and pulled out the flash drive. I know what Victor's doing. I have enough to sink him, but not enough to survive it alone. So here's the deal, Daniel Blake. If we're going to do this, we do it together. No more hiding, no more secrets, no more just for tonight. He blinked slowly as if trying to believe her words were real. You're serious? Dead serious. You don't even know what you're stepping into. She held his gaze. Then show me. And for the first time he nodded, not with guilt or fear, but with resolve. Then we start now. They moved quickly. That night in the back booth of an all-night diner, Daniel laid out everything he'd been collecting. Documents, backups, audio files stored on encrypted servers. Olivia added what she'd uncovered. Timestamps, aliases, and 3 companies linked directly to Victor's offshore accounts. What we need, she said, is someone who can verify this and blow it up in one strike. I have one name, Daniel said. Marcos Delaney, former security officer at Blake Tech. He quit right before things started going south. He knew Victor was up to something, but no one listened. Do you think he'll help? I think he's the only one who might. They tracked Marcos down 3 days later in a quiet suburb outside the city. He was older, heavier, but his eyes hadn't dulled a bit. He listened without interrupting. Then, when Daniel finished explaining, Marcos stood slowly, walked to his study, and returned with a thin manila folder. I never threw this away, he said, because I knew one day you'd come back. Inside were screenshots of internal messages, old server backups, and most importantly, Victor's personal access logs tied to the shell accounts. Will it hold up? Olivia asked. With a time-stamped witness and chain of verification, Marcos said, nodding. Yes, it's enough to open an investigation, but not enough to win. Then we keep going, Daniel said, no matter how long it takes. And as the three of them sat in the quiet warmth of that small house, papers spread across the coffee table, and a storm building outside, Olivia realized something. She wasn't helping a broken man reclaim his legacy. She was helping a good man redeem his soul. The plan was dangerous, reckless even. And yet, Olivia said yes without hesitation. Marcos had connections, quiet ones. One of them worked inside a logistics firm linked to Victor's network of dummy companies. A temp role had just opened. Olivia's background as a freelancer, a runner, someone with no permanent ties, made her the perfect candidate. No one would suspect her. It was all part of Victor's design. Use people who don't ask questions and who no one listens to when they speak. But Victor had never met Olivia Grant. Her interview was brief. The Cheyu, simple. Data entry, scheduling, digital filing. Olivia blended in like wallpaper, polite, dependable, forgettable. But behind that quiet smile, she was watching, listening, collecting. Each day she stayed late. Each night she copied files onto a hidden drive. Victor himself never came to the office. His name wasn't on any door, but the emails bore his signature. The digital footprints were unmistakable. Olivia tracked transfers, flagged unusual timing in invoices, and discovered a hidden schedule, one that outlined a major transaction planned within 2 weeks. A merger between one of Victor's dummy firms and a foreign investor. A deal that would disappear millions. And prove Daniel had been telling the truth all along. One Thursday evening, Olivia stayed behind again. The office was nearly empty. She plugged in her encrypted USB, copied the final batch of files, and was just about to eject when a voice startled her from behind. You're new here, aren't you? She turned. A man stood in the doorway, sharp suit, silver hair, cold smile. Victor Maddox, she forced a smile. Just finishing up for the day. He stepped into the room slowly, eyes scanning the desk, the screen, her face. You've been working late a lot, trying to make a good impression. He nodded, then his smile vanished. Tell me, Miss Grant, is it? Her breath caught. She hadn't used her real name on the application. But Victor didn't wait for an answer. You remind me of someone, he said, circling the desk like a lion in tall grass. A girl I saw once at a fundraiser. She looked out of place, poor posture, nervous eyes, just like yours. She straightened her back, clenched her jaw. I'm just here to work, sir. Victor leaned closer. Good, then work. And don't ask questions. He turned and walked out, leaving the door open behind him. Olivia's hands trembled as she shut the computer down and stuffed the drive into her coat pocket. She didn't wait for the elevator. She ran. Back at her apartment, Daniel was waiting. She burst through the door, heart pounding. He saw me, she said, breathless. He knows his. Daniel didn't ask what happened. He just moved, locked the door, closed the blinds, pulled out the burner laptop. Did you get it? She held out the drive with shaking fingers. He took it carefully, like it was made of glass. We have everything now, he said. More than enough. But Olivia wasn't listening. She sat on the couch, pulled her knees to her chest. He looked at me like I didn't matter, she whispered. Like I was furniture. Like he'd already written my story for him. Daniel knelt in front of her. But he didn't, he said. You wrote this chapter. You stepped into the fire, Olivia. Not for me, for truth. And you walked out holding it. Her eyes filled. I don't feel brave. You don't have to. You just have to keep showing up. The next morning, Marcos sent word. The files had been shared with an investigative journalist he trusted, someone with reach and a backbone. The story was going public. And Victor? He'd be watching it all unfold from the center of the firestorm. But as Olivia watched the first headlines hit the screen, her name wasn't mentioned. Her picture wasn't shown. Just one sentence stood out. Anonymous whistleblower exposes multi-million-dollar shell merger scheme. She smiled faintly. Because sometimes being invisible wasn't weakness. It was power. The news broke like a thunderclap. It started with a midnight article, then a tweet, then a firestorm. By dawn, every major business outlet was ablaze with the headline, "Whistleblower exposes multi-million-dollar fraud in Blake Tech's former executive circle." The story didn't mention names, not yet. But those who knew, knew. Within hours, Victor Maddox's carefully polished empire began to unravel. Banks froze accounts. The board called emergency meetings. Former investors demanded explanations. And beneath all the noise, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood cafe, Daniel and Olivia sat in silence, the hum of the coffee machine their only company. Daniel stared at the screen, unread messages pouring in. The blinking light on his phone was relentless. "Are you going to answer them?" Olivia asked. He looked up slowly. "They want me back." "To fix what Victor broke?" He nodded. "And will you?" Daniel rubbed his hands together, not in hesitation but in weariness. "I left that world for a reason. But if I don't go back now, the company falls into someone worse. The employees lose everything. The ones who believed in me, they'll think I ran." Olivia said nothing. She understood. This wasn't about ego anymore. This was about accountability, about redemption. 2 days later, Daniel Blake stepped into Blake Tech headquarters for the first time in nearly a year. The air was cold, the marble floors polished, the walls lined with faces who used to look up to him. Now they stared in disbelief. Some whispered, some avoided his gaze. Others stood straighter, as if seeing him reminded them of something they'd nearly forgotten. He walked into the boardroom with Olivia by his side. She didn't wear a business suit. She wore jeans and a plain sweater, and somehow looked more powerful than anyone in the room. Victor wasn't there. He wouldn't be. Not after the arrest warrant. But the board was. 10 members, most of whom had smiled at Daniel once and whispered behind his back later. He stood before them without notes, without slides, without excuses. "I'm not here to reclaim a title," he said. "I'm here to make sure Blake Tech survives the people who tried to bleed it dry." There was murmuring. A hand was raised. "Why should we trust you now?" one executive asked. "After you disappeared, after everything, why should we believe you're any different?" Daniel's jaw tightened. But before he could answer, Olivia stepped forward. "Because he didn't disappear," she said, her voice steady. "He survived. He watched everything fall apart and still chose to come back. Not to win, but to fix." She looked around the room, her voice calm but unshakable. "I saw him when he had nothing. And he was still more honest than any of the men who sat at this table and let a fraud run unchecked." Silence. Then a slow nod from the chairwoman. "Welcome back, Mr. Blake." Daniel exhaled, not in relief but in readiness. That evening, back at the apartment, Olivia stood at the window, watching the city lights flicker like stars that had forgotten their place in the sky. Daniel stepped behind her, hands in his pockets. "They want me to stay," he said. "Permanently." She turned, eyes unreadable. "And what do you want?" He hesitated. "I want to rebuild, make it better, smarter, kinder." "And what about us?" she asked softly. He looked down. "I don't want to lose you, Olivia, but I also don't want to drag you into something that'll always come second to a boardroom." Her throat tightened. "You don't get to keep both unless you're willing to fight for both." "I know." She stepped back, giving him space. "Then figure out what matters most." And for the first time since the alley, since the coffee, since the night he told her his name, Daniel wasn't sure how to answer. Because some wars are fought not in courtrooms or columns of numbers, but in the quiet between two people, when truth meets fear. Days passed, but something shifted. Daniel returned to Blake Tech. Meetings filled his schedule. Calls came at midnight. Reporters circled like vultures outside his building. And Olivia, she stayed behind. Not because she was bitter, but because she refused to be background noise in someone else's life. She had walked into his storm, stood in it, and handed him the very truth he needed to reclaim himself. But she would not beg to stay in the shadows while he stepped back into the light. Their conversations grew shorter. "Did you eat?" "Not yet." "Are you coming home tonight?" "Not sure, maybe late." "Are we okay?" Silence. One evening, she stood at the window of her apartment, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He was supposed to be home by 8. It was nearly midnight. She set both cups down and sat at the kitchen table, staring at a blank page in her notebook. Her hands trembled, not out of sadness, but because she knew what had to come next. When Daniel finally returned the next morning, he found the apartment spotless. Too spotless. The couch pillow was still fluffed. The dish rag was dry. The scent of fresh coffee still lingered, but the pot was full, untouched. On the table next to the cold mugs was an envelope, his name written in her handwriting. He sat down slowly and opened it. Daniel, you don't owe me an apology. You owe yourself time, the time to be the man the world needs you to be. But I need something else. I need space to breathe, to remember who I am without you rushing ahead. This isn't the end, but it is a pause. Maybe love isn't about chasing. Maybe it's about meeting, when both people are walking at the same pace. So walk your road. I'll walk mine. If our paths cross again, I'll be ready to look you in the eye and say, I still choose you. Daniel folded the note with trembling hands, and he didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just sat. Still, knowing that she had given him the one thing he never asked for but always needed, a boundary, a breath, a chance to become someone worth coming back to. The apartment was quieter now, not the silence of emptiness, but the stillness of intention. Olivia woke early the next morning. The sun poured gently through the blinds, painting golden lines across the hardwood floor. She sat up, not with heaviness, but with clarity. She had no messages to check, no calls to return, no one else's coffee to pour. And for the first time in a long time, that didn't feel lonely. It felt free. She showered, dressed in her most comfortable sweater, and pulled out the notebook Daniel had once bought her from the thrift shop around the corner, the one with the leather cover and the thin, delicate pages. She opened it to the first blank page and wrote 3 words at the top, where I begin. And then she wrote, I used to think love was about being chosen. Now I know. It's also about choosing myself. Over the next few weeks, Olivia began to build. Not grand things, not companies, not headlines, but quiet things. She took a job at a small bookstore 2 blocks from her apartment. It was owned by a woman named Lorna, who wore scarves in every color of the rainbow and served peppermint tea to customers who stayed too long. Lorna didn't ask for resumes or polished words. She just looked at Olivia and said, You feel like someone who knows how to listen. That was enough. Olivia worked the register, reorganized the shelves, created a handwritten sign for a section labeled Stories That Heal. She added Daniel's name to the thank you page of a journal she kept behind the counter, the one where she jotted down the titles customers whispered to her when they needed comfort. She called her grandmother more often. She started walking in the mornings again, down the same alley where everything began. Sometimes she paused there, looked at the bricks, still stained from years of rain and footsteps, and whispered, Thank you. Not to the place, but to the moment. Because what started as an accident, as a broken lunch and scraped elbow, had led her here. Not to a prince, not to a castle, but to herself. She didn't hear from Daniel, and she didn't try to reach out. Because love, she realized, wasn't about the daily texts or the grand reunions. It was about knowing someone out there once saw you, truly saw you, and helped you see yourself too. And maybe, just maybe, they'd meet again someday. But if they didn't, she would still be whole. The days rolled by like gentle waves, went into the next. Olivia didn't count them. She didn't circle dates on calendars or reread old messages. She simply lived, fully, intentionally. Her bookstore job became a joy, not a stepping stone. She hosted weekend poetry readings. Kids from the neighborhood started calling her Miss Liv. She even wrote again. Quiet essays, short stories, bits of memory woven into fiction. And then, one afternoon, as the sun cast lazy shadows across the shop's wooden floor, Lorna handed her an envelope. No return address, she said, curious, but it smells like cedar. Olivia froze. Her fingers hovered above the flap. Her heart did a quiet, cautious flutter. She opened it. Inside was a single page, handwritten, steady, familiar. Olivia, if this finds you, it means I've finally found myself. I stepped away from everything, from headlines, from shares and structures, and suits that never quite fit. I bought a little place in a small town 2 hours north. There's a shop here, a coffee house. It's nothing big, a few tables, a small garden, quiet. It's called Dentino Cafe, named after the first word I ever spoke to you. Destiny, I think it was. I know you don't owe me anything. I know your life is full without me. But if, by chance, you ever find yourself ready to start something new, not where we left off, but from where we are now, I'll be there. Not waiting, just ready. Olivia read it 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in her pocket. She didn't tell Lorna what it said. She simply smiled and asked, "Do you think I could take this Saturday off?" Lorna raised an eyebrow. "A date?" "Maybe," Olivia said softly. "Or a beginning." Saturday morning came with light rain and a warm breeze. Olivia packed a small bag, a book, a notebook, a scarf Daniel had once left on her couch, and one question tucked gently inside her chest. She followed the handwritten directions. She stepped off the bus into a town that smelled like fresh bread and pine trees, and then there it was, a hand-painted sign on a little wooden door. Dentino Cafe. Fresh starts served daily. She stood in the doorway, soaked in the sound of distant music, the clatter of mugs, the scent of coffee that smelled exactly like hope. And there, behind the counter, wiping his hands on a towel and laughing with an older customer, stood Daniel. No suit, no wait, just him. He looked up. Their eyes met, and time, cruel, beautiful time, melted away. He didn't run. He didn't rush. He just walked toward her, slow and certain. "You came," he said. "I didn't know if I would," she replied. "I hoped you might." They stood inches apart. Neither of them said, "I missed you." They didn't need to. Instead, Olivia asked, "What's today's special?" Daniel smiled. "New beginnings." She laughed. "Do you have oat milk?" "For you? Always." He reached behind the counter, pulled out a small box, and slid it across to her. Inside was a key. She picked it up, eyebrows raised. "I don't need you to move in," he said quickly. "Just open the back garden when you feel ready. It's the best seat in the house." She looked down at the key, then up at the man who once sat beside her on a curb and offered half a loaf of bread, and she nodded. "I'll start with the coffee." Life in the little town bloomed quietly. Mornings at Dentino Cafe began with sunlight spilling through the wide windows, the soft clinking of cups, and laughter that never tried too hard. Olivia found rhythm there, not in perfection, but in peace. She helped Daniel run the cafe when she wasn't at the bookstore. She managed the chalkboard menu, named drinks after literary characters, and reorganized the back shelves for fun. The regulars adored her. Daniel did too. They didn't rush anything. There was no need to define what they were. They simply were. He'd touch the small of her back as he passed her at the espresso machine. She'd leave him notes on the napkin dispenser that said things like, "You forgot to buy oat milk again, but I forgive you." It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. It was home. One night after closing up, they sat in the garden behind the cafe, the one Olivia had unlocked with the small key he'd given her months ago. The trees overhead swayed gently. String lights flickered above them, and a faint breeze carried the scent of time and rain. Daniel poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to her. "To Tuesday," he said. Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Why Tuesday?" "Because it's the day nothing extraordinary happened, and yet it still brought you here." She smiled. They sat in silence for a while, the kind that doesn't ache anymore, the kind that wraps around you like a familiar sweater. Then Daniel shifted. "Can I ask you something?" And he said. Olivia set her glass down and turned toward him. "You just did." He chuckled nervously. "Can I ask you something else then?" She nodded. He reached into his back pocket, not for a box, not for a ring, just a small folded piece of paper. He handed it to her. She unfolded it slowly. It was a note, written in his neat, blocky handwriting. "I've already lived a life of headlines. I've already lost and rebuilt. But I've never woken up every day knowing the person beside me chose to be there. Not out of rescue or pity or need, but out of joy. I don't want a ceremony. I don't need a diamond. I just want a yes that echoes through our ordinary days. Will you build the rest of your quiet life with me?" Olivia looked up, her eyes shimmering with something softer than tears. "You wrote this instead of saying it?" she asked gently. "I was afraid I'd mess it up," he said, smiling. "You already did," she teased, folding the paper and slipping it into her coat pocket. "But that's okay." "Is that a yes?" She leaned forward, touched her forehead to his. "It's a forever yes." They didn't announce it. There was no engagement party, no Facebook post, no list of vendors. The next morning, Olivia showed up at the cafe with a hand-painted wooden sign that simply read, "Partners in Coffee and Everything Else," and she hung it right above the counter. The regulars clapped. Some cried. Daniel just kissed her hand while making lattes. And the world kept spinning, unaware that in one small town, in one quiet cafe, two people had rewritten the rules of what a love story should look like. The morning started like any other. Daniel was behind the counter, humming off-key as he frothed milk. Olivia was organizing a new shelf of slow reads for customers who liked to linger. The air smelled like cinnamon, and the regulars trickled in, one familiar face after another. Then, the bell over the door rang, and everything changed. A tall man in a charcoal suit stepped in, clean-cut, calm, carrying an old briefcase and a face Daniel hadn't seen in nearly 2 years. Marcos Delaney. Daniel froze mid-pour. Olivia looked up, instantly reading the tension that filled the room. Marcos didn't smile. He just gave a quiet nod. "I didn't come to cause trouble," he said. "But there's something you need to know." They sat in the back garden. The cafe was left in the hands of a teenage barista who barely knew how to steam milk. But Olivia didn't care. This was more important. Marcos placed the briefcase on the table and opened it slowly. Inside were papers, a sealed envelope, and an old photo, faded but unmistakable. It was Daniel, standing next to a woman. Her smile was soft, her hand resting protectively on a boy's shoulder. Olivia leaned forward. Daniel didn't move. "Her name was Claire," Marcos said. "She worked in legal, quiet, brilliant. You knew her, but not well." Daniel finally spoke. "She died before the merger, in a car accident." Marcos nodded. That's what everyone thought. But Claire had been working undercover for a financial crimes division. She was trying to trace Victor's offshore network. The accident wasn't an accident. Olivia's breath caught. Marcos continued. "And that boy, her son, his name is Jamie. She kept him hidden from the press. She was afraid. She didn't trust anyone at Blake Tech. Except you." Daniel looked away, his voice cracked. "She never told me." "She left something behind," Marcos said, pushing the sealed envelope toward him. "A letter and custody papers." Daniel flinched. "What?" "She named you as Jamie's guardian, if anything happened to her." Olivia's hand found Daniel's beneath the table, steadying him. Marcos added, Jamie's been with her sister, but she's not well. She reached out last week, said he keeps asking for you." Daniel sat there silent. The same man who once faced boardrooms, lawsuits, and headlines now looked like someone who had been punched in the chest by fate. Olivia squeezed his hand tighter. "Where is he now?" she asked softly. "2 towns over," Marcos replied. "I can take you." Daniel finally lifted his eyes. "No," he said, "we'll go." They didn't talk much on the drive. Daniel sat with the letter unopened in his lap, Olivia beside him, her presence more comforting than any words. When they arrived at the small brick house, a woman opened the door. Worn but kind, she led them inside. And there, sitting quietly on the floor with a book in his lap, was Jamie. 10 years old, brown eyes, quiet strength. He looked up and stared straight at Daniel. Neither of them moved for a long time. Then Jamie whispered, "You're him." Daniel knelt, heart pounding. "I'm Daniel." Jamie nodded slowly. "My mom used to say, if anything ever happened, you'd come." Daniel's voice cracked. She was right. Jamie reached into his backpack and pulled out a photo, the same one from Marcos's briefcase. Only this copy was worn at the corners, folded, kept close. Olivia watched it all unfold from the doorway, tears quietly building behind her smile. Later, on the drive back, Daniel held the unopened envelope in his hands. Olivia finally asked, "Are you ready?" "No," he said, "but I'm going to open it anyway." The cafe looked the same. Warm lights, the scent of ground beans, the hum of life moving gently. But when Daniel and Olivia returned that evening, something had changed. There was a third voice now, a softer one. Jamie sat at a back table, tracing shapes in the condensation on his glass. He didn't speak much at first, just watched, listened, learned. Olivia made him hot chocolate with extra whipped cream. Daniel slid a book across the table. The Boy Who Found the Sky, the one Daniel used to read when he felt small. Jamie read the back cover, then opened to page 1. They didn't rush anything. Daniel didn't try to become a father overnight. Olivia didn't try to replace what Jamie had lost. Instead, they let love grow like a plant on a windowsill, watered daily, spoken to, sometimes silent, sometimes surprising. They added a third chair to the breakfast nook. They cleared a drawer for Jamie's things. One day, Olivia walked into the cafe kitchen to find the boy organizing coffee filters by size. "What are you doing?" she asked, amused. Jamie shrugged. "Daniel says things run better when everything has a place." She smiled. "He's right." Weeks passed. The town, once a quiet secret, now whispered about the family at Dentino, the couple who served the warm drinks and kind words. The boy with big eyes and a quiet heart. One rainy Saturday, Daniel sat Jamie down at the counter. There was no speech, no pressure. He simply pulled out the envelope Claire had left behind and placed it between them. "Do you want to read it together?" he asked. Jamie nodded. They opened it side by side. Inside was a handwritten letter, full of love, memory, and hope. Claire's voice poured across the page like a soft song. She spoke of Daniel not as a businessman, not even as a hero, but as a man who once offered her kindness when no one else did. She believed in him, and she believed he'd protect her son. At the end of the letter were 7 words. "Don't save the world, save his." Daniel closed his eyes and whispered, "I will." That night, Olivia found a quiet moment in the garden, now filled with blooms Jamie had helped plant. Daniel joined her. "I was never supposed to have this," he said. "This?" she asked. He gestured toward the cafe, the home behind it, the boy asleep upstairs. "All of it." "You didn't steal it," she said. "You earned it." Daniel turned to her, eyes soft. "You think he'll want to stay?" "He already has." And as the lights inside dimmed and the rain gently tapped the windows, Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver charm. Not a ring, not a contract, just a tiny house on a keychain. "I was going to give this to Jamie," he said, "but I want you to have it first, because you built this place long before I ever arrived." Olivia took it, speechless. "It's not a proposal," he added, smiling. "We already promised each other everything that matters." She held the charm in her palm. "It's perfect," she whispered, 1 year later. Dentino Cafe had a new sign, "Cafe and Home." The shelves had more books. The counter had 3 stools. And the back wall bore a framed photo of Claire, smiling gently, forever watching over them. Customers came not just for coffee, but for stories, for peace, for proof that people can start over. And in the quiet before opening each day, Olivia would walk into the kitchen, brush flour off Daniel's cheek, kiss Jamie's hair, and think, This is what it means to live a love story that lasts, not a perfect one, but a true one." What did you think of Daniel and Olivia's journey? On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate this story? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. If this story touched your heart, give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more beautiful, emotional stories like this one. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss another story. And click the final screen to watch more soul-stirring tales from ordinary lives with extraordinary hearts.